Chapter 536 FM 101 May 2025 TE Regular Army, the Regular Army, commonly referred to as the Active Duty Force, consists of full-time soldiers under the command of the President of the United States. Though the Army's structure varies based on a variety of factors, especially whether the country is at war, the Active Duty Force typically makes up close to half of the total Army. Our country deploys troops from the regular Army when prompt service is needed to respond to crisis or conflict abroad. However, as those operations grow longer or larger, active duty formations rely on units and capabilities maintained by the Army National Guard and Army Reserve. When on U.S. soil, regular Army troops are limited in terms of the type of operations they can perform and when they can be deployed. In most cases, federal troops are deployed on U.S. soil at the request of a state's governor. As such, if you are an active duty soldier, your training will primarily be focused on contingency operations overseas. To learn more about these limitations, see literature on the Posse Comitatus Act, Insurrection Act, Title 10 of U.S. Code, and Title 32 of U.S. Code. Reserve components. Aside from the active duty component, there are two reserve components, the U.S. Army National Guard and the Army Reserve. Most National Guard and Army Reserve soldiers serve part-time, which generally means training 1 weekend out of the month and 2 additional weeks in the year to fulfill an annual requirement. At the same time, leaders in these units often dedicate many more unaccounted for hours for the sake of the mission. There are also a small number of reserve and guard soldiers who serve on full-time active duty status, called active guard and reserve. When they are not training, reservists and guardsmen are free to maintain civilian jobs, attend school, and even hold elected offices. In fact, a number of members of Congress are either reservists or guardsmen. If you are a reservist or guardsman, the nature of your service gives you a special connectivity to the civilian world, a connection that may not be as easily generated by active duty troops, who often live and work on Army installations. The Army National Gear RD, one of the reserve components. The Army National Guard is a state-based military force that currently makes up about 1/3 of the Army's total strength. It is the only component of the Army with a dual role outlined in the Constitution. On the one hand, it is a state military force consisting of both combat and sustainment formations. On the other hand, it can be federalized and serve as a reserve for the regular Army. Today, every state has a National Guard, as do the U.S. territories. Guam, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia, making our structure. 01 May 2025 FM 137 54 Guard forces in total. Each state or territory Army National Guard has an adjutant general, a general officer appointed by the governor who serves as its uniformed leader. Army National Guard forces remain under the command of their respective governors until mobilized for federal service, though governors generally deploy their National Guard units to respond to natural disasters and other domestic emergencies many times a year. Additionally, governors may order them to support law enforcement activities. This is unique, as federal forces, for example, the regular Army and Army Reserve, are generally prohibited from conducting domestic law enforcement missions by the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, with some exceptions. While serving in their state capacity, Army National Guard soldiers are subject to their state's legal standards. When called to federal service, they become subject to federal military codes. The U.S. Army Reserve. The U.S. Army Reserve is the other reserve component. Like the regular Army, the U.S. Army Reserve is under the command of the President and serves as a federal military force. Like Guardsmen, reservists typically serve part-time. The Army Reserve currently makes up about 1/5 of the Army's organized units, but provides half of the Army's sustainment units, 1/4 of the Army's mobilization base expansion capability, and most of its civil affairs capacity. Army Reserve soldiers also strengthen headquarters and fill vacancies in the regular Army during crises. Army civilians. Supporting the uniformed Army, but still a part of the Army profession, is a workforce of Department of the Army civilians, who provide additional and reinforcing skills, expertise, and competence to the team.